How you doing, folks? This is Rex at the Buckeyenest down here with another impromptu movie for you. I thought I'd go downtown today and take a look at this newfangled equipment our military uses. This has to be an amphibious assault vehicle because it's got these motor fins down here, and I think I've seen one or two of them, but we didn't use nothing like this back in my day. Back in my day, we had armored personnel vehicles, and we were able to get in the water with them, but not quite like this thing does. It does one hell of a job. Back in my day, these things here were grenade launchers and missile launchers. I don't know what these things are now. It's a DNA. Oh, that's a grenade launcher. All right, that's what I thought it was then. And then, like I said, down here is your propellers. This is where the troops get in and out through these doors here. Our APCs look something similar. They didn't have tires on them, they had tracks. And they weren't quite as long as this thing was either. But the APCs that I used to drive and work in, I was a mortarman when I got transferred to a combat support company. And our 4-deuce mortar sit in the back of this thing, way up in the top, and the back opened up, and then we fired out through that. But we could go into water with our old APCs too, but probably not as good as these things. These are fuel cans on the side. I think that one, oh, that's a water can. That's plastic. Yep, that's water. This is plastic too. All of ours back in my day were all metal. Let's go on down around through here and take a look at this other stuff. Yeah, I don't really know what this thing is here either, but it looks like it's another amphibious assault vehicle. Those might be propellers or ejector fins there. But this thing looks a little more like what I used to work with when I was in the Army. Except our hatch that dropped didn't have a door in it, and our APCs weren't as big as these things were. This looks more like, I can't see on the top too well there, but these are probably periscopes that the troops inside can use to see what's going on around them. And then you see some grenade launchers up there on the top. These are tracks. They're nothing like the tracks I used to have to deal with. When I was in the Army, my first MOS was I was a tank commander, and we had much bigger tracks than these. I'll never forget one time we busted a track pad. That's what one of these things is called here. And by the time I got through fixing that one track pad, I ended up having to fix 13 of them because the whole track had busted end connectors on them. And of course, this is the communications, and this has got to be, this is called a cupola of some kind. And there's those grenade launchers we were talking about earlier, and that mount right there reminds me of a 50 caliber mount when I was in the Army. And I don't know what that thing is pointed out right there. Some kind of a gun or something on it. And this is the Marines attack chopper. This is a Cobra, except the Cobras that I used back in my days, they weren't as big as this thing was. This is a minigun on the front. When it fires, it puts out one round in every square inch of a football field every time it passes through that football field, so nobody lives through that. These big things on the side that you see here are missile launchers of some type, and these are some kind of a pod that allows it to float when it lands. Big difference than what I had to deal with back in the day. The Cobras we had back in the day were a real small area here. This is a two-pilot Cobra. The ones we were used to using were small one-pilots, and the thing looked like a big bubble on the front. It didn't have all this extra air-to-ground missiles and stuff like that on it. It just had miniguns mounted on it, and it was used for assault, and it was used to clear out the jungle. When we got into trouble, we'd call in the boys in the Cobras, and they'd clear out the jungle for us. Of course, they got this thing all prettied up for you. This is the Red Dog company. My unit when I was in the Army was the Thunderbolts. Of course, we were tanks. These things here, these guys here are quite different. Way down there is a deuce-and-a-half truck, something similar to what I used to drive when I was in the Army. I had a license to drive everything on wheels and everything on tracks. And this thing here, I've never seen one of these before in my entire life. Let's get a closer look at it. It looks like some kind of a truck, but it's a combat vehicle because it's got armor windows in it. It may be a missile launcher of some kind, because that looks like missile housing units there. When freedom rings, we toll the bell. Yep. United States Marine Corps. There's a water canister. Let's see if we can figure out. Yeah, this is some kind of a launcher pod. This is some kind of a missile firing unit here. Boy, you know, the more I look at this stuff, it brings back some old memories, but we never had this kind of stuff when I was in the Army. What do we got over here? This looks like a well, it's not a Black Hawk, and maybe it could be a Black Hawk. We got some pilots here. Yeah, this is a UNH-1N Huey. It's similar to a Black Hawk, but it's more similar to a CH-47, which is what we used back in my day. What do you mount on this pod right here, guys? Is that a 50 mount or 50?
You can actually take it out and put whatever you want. 240.
What's in the
rocket pod, sir?
Rocket pod? Would you say this is similar to a CH-47? No?
It's a little smaller.
A little smaller?
Better.
Yeah.
Because we have us in there.
You got you guys in there?
In the back, yes, sir.
I was a tank commander back in my day, but we didn't have things like this. We had much smaller choppers.
Are you making a documentary?
I'm making a movie for the website that I own, yeah. I own a website called the Buckeyenest. You guys will be movie stars.
They wish.
Got any tanks around here? I didn't see any tanks. Is there any tanks around here? Oh, all right. Well, let's go up here and take a look at this tank. And these are military Hummers. Not like the ones we got on the streets today, but these are Hummers. We didn't have these things when I was in the Army. We had APCs and Jeeps. Old Willie's Jeeps. This one's seen some combat too. You guys take care of this vehicle?
No, sir.
No?
These aren't our trucks. Our trucks are back.
These are Hummers, right?
Yes, sir.
Different versions of them?
This one, they just have it outfitted with a scissor mount for a tail missile. And this one's just the, I mean, they're both pretty much the same. This just has a little bit of different hardware on it.
Did you say tow missile?
Yes, sir.
Okay, what is that?
Tail missile is a wire-guided anti-tank missile.
Okay, alright, that's what I thought it was. Back in my day, I was a commander on M68-1s, and my secondary MOS was, I was a red-eye gunner.
Okay.
You know what that is?
It's an anti-tank missile.
Well, no. Well, kind of. It's a heat-guided missile. It locks on anything with a large heat object in the area. But we were mainly used them against aircraft back in that day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
What kind of tank is this up here? Do you know?
M1 Abrams.
That's an M1 Abrams? Alright folks, well I'm going to finally get a chance to look at an M1 Abrams up close. Now I've got to tell you something about this tank. When I was in the Army, I handled an M60A1. It's nothing like this, but I have to tell you the rumors that was going on about this tank, because in my day this tank hadn't even made the field yet. Now these hatches on this tank, the rumor was you could battle lock yourself inside this tank, and inside this turret, I have to giggle because in here there was supposed to be cots that you could drop down and sleep on. There was supposed to be a kitchen in there that you could cook on, and the crew could battle lock themselves inside, battle lock all the hatches. This is the front, this is where the driver sits, and all the cupola hatches, and live inside this thing up to 6 months without ever having to come out. All the ammunition was fed through the sides, and ammunition ports and everything was fed through the back. This is the rear end of the tank. Now they got me kind of baffled here. They got a muzzle cup on that so it can't be used, but they must have dropped the main gun down some. But imagine the rumors of being able to live inside this thing for up to 6 months without ever having to come out, and that's what the rumors were going around back in my day. What's this thing up here? Slave starting. Oh, I remember those days. Now the tanks that I commanded and drove, we had 6 road wheels. These things here are road wheels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These have 7 on them. They have transmission wheels back here. These are transmissions, and how these things turn is when the driver's in there and he whips the T-bar to the left, for example, it locks this track up and the whole tank turns and pivots on a dime on this side. They have what's called a 360-degree turn, and I don't know if this tank could do it, but the ones that I'm used to doing, I sat inside underneath of this thing here when I first started out, and when you come down a mountainside or something, you could whip the T-bar to the left or to the right, and what would happen is both tracks would turn opposite directions, and then the tank itself would turn on a dime. One of the things we used to have to do that I kind of hated was for our PT, physical training. If you look here, this is a track, a road wheel. We used to have to low crawl underneath of these things for physical training with a road wheel on our chest. all the way down underneath of this tank. And if you look down there, there's not much room underneath of there. We actually had a little more room on our tanks, but on this one here, there wasn't much room. I'm looking for blackout drives. These things here on these tanks, when we went into combat, these of course are rear lights, like on your car or something, but when we went into combat, these were what's called combat blackout lights. And all that would be on this whole tank, when it's in a column or we're moving and we're in combat, is these little red lights right here. And you had to focus on those, especially if you were in a column, because if you couldn't see them, you couldn't see this thing in front of you. And if you didn't see this thing in front of you, you got yourself in serious trouble. Now these things here, these are grenade launchers, but we didn't have these on our tanks. This is an ammo can, and I'll bet that ammo can probably feeds a 50 caliber machine gun mounted right there by the main gun, or maybe a 30 caliber. We had 50s on top of our tanks, and mounted next to the main gun we had 30 calibers. The 30 calibers were called coaxes because they fired ammunition and things the same distance where this main gun was pointed, so they were called coaxes at the time. One of the neat things about these things that we didn't have is all around this top, it's all protected with armor. This track is protected with armor plating on the sides. We didn't have those on the type of tanks I was used to using. Boy, this thing brings back some memories. Let's take a peek underneath it here. There's another grenade launcher right there, and that's probably an ammo can feeding ammunition into the turret somehow. That's what it looks like anyway. Up here in this back rack, we had something very similar in the back rack on our tanks, and we were able to keep our personal gear up there, like sleeping bags and stuff like that. This is the communications up here. They put big monster antennas on this one here. The antenna back in my day was 15 foot tall, so that made the tank itself quite tall. You had to be careful about what you were going under, but in the same token, they were so strong, if you ran through trees or brush or something, it acted just like a giant whip and tore everything down. So yeah, this thing brings back some memories. I don't know all the specifications about it, but I'm told this thing can fire on the run. Back in my day, our biggest threat was the Russians, and they had tanks that could fire on the run, but the tanks that I worked with, they couldn't fire on the run. We had to stop, so our gunnery skills had to be exceptionally well, because when we stopped, we had to be able to fire that round within 3 to 5 seconds and be back on the move, because if not, the Russians, their tank crews were deadly accurate even on the move, so we had to keep moving and go into what was called evasive maneuvering. If we would have ever gone into a Cold War with Russia, those were the tactics we had to use. This thing here, I'm trying to figure out what it is. I think it's some kind of a sight on the main gun, which is kind of weird because it looks like it's out of calibration. If you look here, it looks like it's pointed more like that when it should be aligned with the main gun. Now I can tell you a true story now because it's been too many years, but back in my day we were on a road march. We were coming back in from a training exercise, and I was driving, and we were in blackout mode, which means these little red lights were the only thing that were on that I could see on the tank in front of me. And the main gun, this is the main gun, it was pointed to the front. We were tactical, and I had dropped down to light a cigarette up here in the front. These driver's seats underneath this hatch I pointed out to you earlier has a lever on them, and you can reach down to your left side and pull that lever, and the seat drops down inside the driver's compartment. And if you're fast enough, you can light up a cigarette and pop back up within a second or two, and no harm done. This particular time, when we were coming back on this road march, I dropped that seat to light that cigarette up, and when I come back up, the tank in front of me was gone. I didn't see it. I couldn't see it. I couldn't see the red light I told you about here. It was all gone. There was nothing there, nothing but dust and dirt. And then all of a sudden I looked up, and here was the biggest boulder I had ever seen in my entire life. I mean, this boulder was 4 times the size of this tank. Let me back up here so you can get a full view of this. This boulder was 4 times the size of this tank, and remember now, I told you, my main gun was pointed to the front. We wore communications helmets. They were called CVCs, and all you had to do was you reached up, and there's a lever on your left ear, and you pushed that lever forward, and you could talk to the crew. So I grabbed my helmet, and I'm screaming, the gun tube, because I'm barreling down on this big rock, and this tank I'm driving is doing about 50 plus miles an hour, so it's just not going to turn on a dime like your car does out here on the street or something. I'm barreling down on that boulder, and I'm screaming, the gun tube. And before I could finish the second word, I whipped the T-bar real hard to the left. But it wasn't in time, because you have to picture this now. You're going to get a giggle out of this when I tell you this. That main gun, the end of that gun on that tank I was driving, hit that rock, and it sounded like we just fired a main gun round right out of this thing. It sounded like we just fired a big old shell right out of this tank. And of course, rocks got chipped off of that boulder, and rocks were all over the tank, and all kinds of different things there, and all I could think of, and this is where you'll get your giggle at the time, was I flashed back to the old Bugs Bunny movie cartoons. Everybody remembers those, how Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd used to get into it, and Bugs used to walk up and stick his finger in the end of Bugs's shotgun, and then the shotgun would go off and the barrel would flare back, and Elmer would be standing there with black powder all over him from that barrel blowing up on him, and bugs, of course, wouldn't be hurt at all. So I pictured that. I pictured this main gun just all a wreck. Then the next thing that goes through my mind is I pictured sitting in front of a big pile of potatoes the rest of my life with a potato peeler, sitting there peeling potatoes on KP, paying for a main gun that was my fault. It got destroyed. But amazingly enough, it didn't do anything to that main gun. The only thing it did to that main gun is, back in my day, is we had this old saying, all it did was chip off the paint and piss off the crew. Alright, I'll have to bleep that out, I suppose. But I guess I've rambled on enough about the memories and stuff I had back in the day looking at all this down here. So until next time, folks, have a good night.